From FingerLakes1.com, I'm Josh Durso, and this is Inside the FLX. Today our program begins on a front porch near you. A couple months ago, we had Leslie Danks Burke on the program to discuss her organization, Trailblazers PAC, which has really taken the political region by storm. They have an event coming up, which Leslie is here to tell us about. Leslie, thanks so much for coming back again. It's only been a few weeks.
It's great to see you again, Josh. Thanks very much for getting the word out.
So give us the 411 on. So talk to us about what this event is. And then we'll sort of start to weigh in on the other sort of parts that are
sure. This is going to be a lot of fun. This is next Tuesday night, April 17th, at Club 86 in Geneva. We will be putting on a performance of Front Porch Politics, the musical entertainment, which uses Broadway show tunes to tell the story of front porch politics and why local politics matters and why it's so important to move local politics out of the back room and onto the front porch.
So how did it, I guess the obvious question is, how did it come to be? How did this, I'm assuming there was a lot of prep time involved in sort of getting this moving.
This has taken an extraordinary amount of work. The incredible Rachel Lampert, who was the artistic director of the Kitchen Theater in Ithaca for 25 years, retired last summer, and in her retirement, she decided to start tinkering with some Broadway show tunes and to write the story of front porch politics in musical form. She then recruited a group of actors who have put this together. It's about a 45-minute show. It's hilarious and entertaining, and it takes an artistic approach to why folks should be engaged in local politics. And we've now taken the show on the road, and it's coming here to Geneva, and it should be a really fun evening.
Okay, so I guess my personal curiosity is this probably is a great way to reach some folks who might not otherwise be totally engaged in what you guys are doing. How much of that went into why you guys developed this idea and how it got all started?
You know, you make a really good point there, Josh. You don't often think of politics and artistic performances intersecting, but you know, artists are great at telling stories, and our view at Trailblazers PAC is that everyone should be participating in local politics, that it's part of our civic duty and our civic responsibility to be engaged in our communities. And thank goodness people like Rachel Lampert think the same thing. Rachel actually came to us and said, you know, I think there's a story here that we can tell through music about what you're doing to engage people locally. And she started writing it and sent us a couple drafts, and it was utterly hilarious. And we said, sure, let's put this thing on the stage.
How long was I'm curious, how long was the writing portion of that process?
Rachel's pretty amazing. She is a very hard worker. I think that from when she first started thinking about this to when we actually performed it for the first time in Ithaca, it was about 6 months. And, you know, that was in January. It received a wealth of applause and accolades in Ithaca. And so now, very generously, Rachel and the actors who performed it are all getting on a bus and coming up here to Geneva and performing it again. We're hoping to be able to do it again once or twice somewhere in the area, because it really is a fun evening.
I was going to say, what's the sort of long-term plan for something like this? Because it seems like it'd have quite a long shelf life, and really I don't see the political climate changing anytime soon. So a lot of the things that you guys are doing are going to be relevant for years to come. Is this something that you guys might continue to sort of push towards?
We might. Our real message is to try to get people to engage with their local communities in whatever way works best for them. And so these theater performers, this writer, Rachel Lampert, have decided that their particular talents of writing and performing in musical entertainment are a way to tell the story of how to engage in local politics. There's other folks who bring other talents to the table. We may very well perform this again in other places. We're doing it as a supper club style performance at Club 86 in Geneva. Doors will open at 5:15, and there'll be dinner provided by Club 86, drinks, and then the show starts at 6 o'clock. And it's all a fundraiser to raise money for the candidates that Trailblazers PAC supports. So what we do at Trailblazers PAC is we're a nonpartisan organization that supports candidates for local office only at the county level and below. We only work with your town board members, city mayors, village trustees, that level of office, who take a stand for clean government. So any candidate who is willing to be 100% transparent about their campaign finances and also is willing to engage their local communities in front porch politics rather than just pulling in money from outside interests, those candidates are candidates that we will donate to and give money to help them in their campaigns. So this particular event is in large part a fundraiser so that we can give money to the candidates we support.
What does 100% transparent mean? I know we talked about this before, but I think it's really important for people to sort of understand what you're talking about when you say that, total transparency.
You got it. Josh, there is a real challenge of money in politics corrupting the conversation. And we see that during campaigns, and we see that after elected officials are in office. What we believe at Trailblazers PAC is that what a candidate does during their campaign is a pretty good indicator of how they're going to behave once they get into office. We ask our candidates to fully disclose all the money into their campaigns and all the money that goes back out, all of their expenditures and all of their inputs. That's actually not required by law, but there's no reason somebody can't do better than the law requires. So what we ask our candidates to do is when they're doing their financial disclosures, which are required, you have to do a certain number of financial disclosures, go ahead and tell the voters everything about your finances. Go ahead and tell them all the places you got money, not just the places that are required by law to divulge. We're a PAC. We're Trailblazers PAC. We're established under the rules of a PAC in New York State and then also in the state of Pennsylvania. And we don't have to disclose all of our money in or out either. But we do it to lead by example and in hopes that that will inspire other folks to do the same.
You know, one of the questions, after the last time you were on, one of the questions that popped up was, what does it actually cost to run one of these local elections? So you're considering a campaign. How much money should you expect to have to spend or raise or ultimately push out to either run or win in what you guys see?
It's really not huge dollar figures like you see in congressional races or in state level races. Very often to win a town board seat or a town supervisor seat, it's going to be $10,000 or less. And very often what people do who are running for those seats is, they look at their whole budget of, let's say, $5,000. They decide to put $1,000 of their own money into it. They go to their Aunt Jane in California, who's always loved them, and Aunt Jane says, "Sure, honey, I'll give you $1,000 towards your race." They go to the local Republican committee or the local Democratic committee, and they kick in $1,000, and maybe a few other people donate a little bit of money, and they call it a day. What we do at Trailblazers PAC is encourage them to, instead of going to Aunt Jane in California who can't donate to you and who isn't part of the local community, we ask our candidates to go to, let's say, 10 people in their local community, get each one of those 10 people to give $100, or maybe get 25 people to each give $25. That invests the local community in the campaign. It forces the candidate to go talk directly with voters. And in the end, it makes the candidate accountable to their voters. You're accountable based on where your money comes from. We use those words to talk about investment in campaigns, buy-in into a message, being accountable. Those are all financial terms that we use. They just roll off the tongue when we're talking about campaigns. The reason they're financial terms is because money talks. The money in politics affects future behavior, and we want, if there's going to be an effect, to have that effect be tied to the local voters.
What kind of reception have you guys seen just in terms of how taxpayers, voters react to your candidates, to the candidates that you guys push forward? Obviously, with all of the talk about transparency and clean government, they're all things that people, gripe about and want to hear more about. But is the reception, equal? Is it usually positive?
We're hearing very positive feedback back from voters. What we do, in addition to donating directly to candidates and mentoring candidates through their campaigns, we also provide workshops that are open to anybody, any supporters, any community members, anybody who wants to learn about local politics and how they work are welcome to come to our workshops. And what we hear in those workshops is that voters, citizens who are invested in their communities, really want to see more connection between their local office holders and the communities they represent. So people seem to be overwhelmingly positive about what we're doing. And I think that that's a real statement for our future. I'm pretty optimistic, frankly, about the state of politics in America right now. I see lots of people getting engaged in the conversation, and that's going to make us a better community.
Now, that was gonna be my follow-up question. With how tense things are, with the sort of political animosity between the two parties, the large divide, the polarized nature of politics in 2018, what do you see happening over the next 2 to 3 to 4, 5, 6 years?
I think that we're going to see more and more local engagement. I think that we're going to see more and more citizens, more and more voters saying, I'm done with the big fancy politicians. I'm done with hearing people make promises during campaigns that they don't follow through on. I'm done with seeing decisions made in dark rooms that I don't know anything about that then affect me in my day-to-day life. We need to hold these people accountable. And we're going to get back to what our founding fathers really expected us to do, which is to participate in our communities.
How do you prevent those people? Because a lot of what you guys do seems to be educating citizens, educating people who are running. How do you keep those individuals who are tired, who are burned out, from falling off? Because in small communities, it seems like that has been the trend and not this sort of call to action that some folks have been sort of hoping for. Mm-hmm. You get a lot of folks who say, oh my God, this is so tiring. You know, they run, they win. And then, you know, a few people, I've talked to some people here in Seneca Falls and even a couple individuals who are serving on town council. And, you know, they're like, I don't know what I got into. This is so much worse than I ever expected it to be. And how much of what you guys do has to be geared toward keeping people, taxpayers, the candidates, the elected officials engaged and interested before they sort of fall off into that abyss?
Turn off the national news. Turn off the noise and focus on what you can do locally to make your community better. And we see it happening actually all the time. Let's take a look at, for example, the opioid epidemic that is ravaging communities in our area. We see national politicians talking about opioids. They're talking about making differences. They're talking about including money in the federal budget. There ended up being very, very little in the federal budget to actually shift the course of the opioid epidemic in rural communities across America. There ended up being very little in the New York State budget that is any different from what we've seen in past years. But take a look at Monroe County and what Monroe County is doing to get dollars directly to local villages and to local town representatives to start enabling the distribution of Narcan, for example, into libraries, into other first responder pockets so that they have that available to help communities in need. If we can really focus on the small but very, very important steps that local communities are taking, that adds up. And it is a huge counterbalance to the inaction on the federal and the state level.
That was going to be my next question. So what sort of issues do you guys see as being the big ones? Obviously, local politics is much different than what we see at the federal and state level, but I'm sure there's some overlap on issues. What are sort of some of the issues that you guys see candidates spotlighting and really taking an interest to?
You know, one of the things that I think is very similar at the federal level and the state level and then at the local level is voters' real concern with corruption in politics and how perhaps politicians are not making decisions based on what's best for the community, but instead based on who is putting lobbying funds into their pockets. And I think that there's a perception out there that that doesn't happen at the local level, but gosh, it sure does. You see local issues over and over influenced by whoever, you know, the outside interest is that wants to come in and perhaps change how business is done in a particular town. And that shows up in campaigns. It shows up once office holders are in office. So my recommendation is not to think so much about what's a federal issue or a state issue versus a local issue, but instead to think about what is it that your local officials can do to push the ball down the field and to actually make some change on whatever issue it is that you care about, whether it's education. Your local officials are going to set property taxes. That's going to affect the local education budget. That's going to affect how much your particular school where you serve on the PTA is going to end up getting from the state. Those sorts of issues really start at the local level, and you've got to engage locally to make any difference higher up.
How can people get involved with what Trailblazers is trying to do? Obviously, I'm assuming there's some organizational impact, but also, I'm sure you encourage people to get out and not only vote, but maybe run for office?
Absolutely. We are constantly looking for candidates who are interested in running for office. We are willing to endorse on both sides of a race, for example. We have not yet had the opportunity to do that. We haven't had a candidate who on one side of a race opts into our full transparency and our local engagement criteria, and also another candidate on the other side. But our real goal is that candidates on both sides of races will do that, because that's going to end up engaging more voters in democracy. So we reach out to people when a candidate gives us a call and says, hey, I'm thinking about running. We explain to them, our mentorship process and how we take them through the game day to election day. And we also educate people throughout communities about the fact that if you're involved in your community, basically if you're alive and paying attention, you're qualified to run for office. And too often people think that you need to have some special talent, you need to have some special degree in order to run for office. That's not the case. If you're engaged in your community and you know what is going to work well for the folks in your region, then sure, you have every right to bring that voice to the table.
Now, one more time for those who might not have caught it earlier, what is the event and how can people get involved with the event? We're about a week away, right?
We're exactly a week away. It's Front Porch Politics, the musical entertainment at Club 86. It's a supper club presentation of Broadway show tunes, pivoted a little bit to tell the story of why local engagement is important. It's very funny. It will be at Club 86 with dinner starting at 5:15, and the show begins at 6 o'clock. Tickets are $100, in part to cover the dinner and drinks and entertainment that you get, but also to raise money for the candidates that we're supporting this year. And go to trailblazerspac.com to get tickets. Also, really consider, if you are running for office or if you know someone who's running for office, let them know that Trailblazers PAC is out there and that we have money to give to candidates who take a stand for clean government.
What is the geography, quickly, before we go here? I do want to ask that, just so people understand where you guys sort of operate. It's regional, right? It's not hyperlocal?
We work with any candidates in New York State or in the state of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So we're willing to work with candidates who are running for anything up to the county level. So county executive, city mayor, those would be kind of the highest level of office that we'd be looking at.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming in. Obviously, some really fascinating stuff. And of course, I'm sure we'll be having you back to talk politics more, because all of these different moving parts are just really, really fascinating. So thanks a lot for coming in.
Thanks so much, Josh. And what you are doing here at FLX is really making a difference locally, and I appreciate it.
Really appreciate that. Well, that is going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Leslie, our listeners, and of course, FingerLakes1.com for making this podcast possible. Inside the FLX airs Sundays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum, channel 1304, and is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. You can also catch us on WDWN 89.1 FM in Auburn during the 10 o'clock hour on Saturdays. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Great.